Lecture 3. This lecture was delivered by Friedrich Nietzsche on February 27th, 1872. Honored audience, at the end of my last lecture, the conversation I had overheard and that remains fresh in my memory, whose basic lineaments I have tried to retrace for you here, was interrupted by a long and earnest pause. The philosopher and his companion, sunk in melancholy silence, felt the topic of their discussion, the crisis of the gymnasium, our most important educational institution, as a weight on their soul that no single individual, however well intentioned, was strong enough to lift, and that the masses had no intention of even trying to lift. Two things in particular grieved our solitary thinkers. First, that what would rightly be called, quote-unquote, classical education is nothing but a free-floating cultural ideal with no chance of taking root in the soil of our existing educational system. While what is customarily called classical education, with not a single voice raised in protest, is nothing but an aspirational illusion which at best succeeds in keeping the phrase, quote, classical education, end quote, alive, proving that it has not lost its solemn sound and pathos. Second, when it comes to the teaching of German, it was clear to these two honest men that the gymnasium of today had no idea how even to begin to build a higher education on the pillars of antiquity. The degenerate state of instruction in German, the intrusions of historical erudition in place of practical discipline, and a training in good linguistic habits, the connection between certain gymnasium assignments and the regrettable spirit of our journalistic public sphere, all these clearly visible signs persuaded them that, sadly, not a trace remained of the benefit powers emanating from classical antiquity, which could prepare students for their struggle against the barbarism of the present day. And hello to whoever's in the chat. Thanks for watching. And that might once again transform our gymnasiums into arsenals and armories for that struggle. On the contrary, the spirit of antiquity was being categorically rejected, even as the gymnasium gates were thrown open wide to what melancholy and shameless flattery passes for, quote, contemporary German culture, end quote. If our forlorn interlocutors felt any hope for at all, it was that things must grow even worse long before that what only a few had hitherto suspected would soon be urgently clear to the many, and that the time for honest and resolute men was close at hand in the crucial realm of popular education too. All the more firmly, then, the philosopher said, do I cling to the German spirit as revealed in the German Reformation and in German music, and which, in the tremendous courage and rigor of German philosophy, in the recently tested loyalty of the German soldier, has shown proof of that lasting strength averse to all false appearance. It is from this spirit that we too may expect to prevail over the fashionable pseudo-culture of the present day. I hope that in the future, the schools will draw true culture into the battle, and especially in the gymnasium. In spite of this, that they might inspire the younger generation with a burning passion for what is truly German. In doing so, schools will finally put so-called classical education on its natural footing once more and give it to and give it its only possible starting point. A true purification and renewal of the gymnasium can proceed only from a deep and violent purification and renewal of the German spirit. The link between the innermost essence of the German and the genius of the Greek is a mysterious bond, extremely difficult to grasp. But until the true German spirit, in its noblest and innermost need, reaches out for the saving hand of the Greek genius, as though for a firm handhold in the raging river of barbarism, until an all-consuming desire for what is Greek breaks forth from this German spirit, until the distant view of the Greek homeland, laboriously achieved, with which Schiller and Goethe refreshed their spirits, has become a place of pilgrimage for the best and most gifted among us. Until then, the gymnasium's goal of classical education will flutter about in the air, untethered to anything. And those who work to nurture erudition in the gymnasium, however limited a form of academic spirit that might be, so as to have at least one real, firm, and in some ideal goal in view, and thus save their students from the seductions of the glittering phantom now known as culture and education, they will have nothing to reproach themselves for. After the two had reached in silence some point of reflection, the younger man turned to the old philosopher and said, "You have wanted to console me, teacher, and you have given me greater insight and thus strength and courage. Truly, I look upon the battlefield more boldly now and condemn my all too hasty retreat. We are not fighting for ourselves alone. We cannot and must not care how many will fall in the struggle, or whether we ourselves will perhaps be among the first to perish. Precisely because we are committed to the struggle, we need not give a thought to the poor individual. The moment one sinks to the ground, another will pick up the flag we have sworn to follow. Whether I have the strength for this struggle, whether I will hold out, no longer concerns me. To fall under the mocking laughter of the enemy may well be an honorable death, since after all, their seriousness so often struck us as laughable. When I think of the way I and others in my generation prepared for the same career, the highest position a teacher can have, I realize how often we laughed at precisely the opposite things and were serious about the most different things as well. Pause for a second. I have somebody saying, "What is this?" This is Friedrich Nietzsche's speech, Anti-Education. If you're interested in this, you can always keep listening and watch the two previous lectures I read a few weeks ago. So I will pick up. Right now I'm reading the English translation. The original, of course, is in German. I have this is a first edition of the original German. I'd love to be able to read it. I do not have the same fluency in German, especially older types of German, as I do in English, but it would be nice to read it at some time. One purpose I have in streaming this, besides other people listening, is so that I can listen to myself read it in English and then follow along in German at the same time. This is helpful for me to read the German and understand in English. And then if potentially I could have an audio recording in German, I could do the same thing, listen to it in German then, and maybe follow along in English. Those are two skills for getting more fluent at reading in a foreign language. So thank you very much. And let me continue. The conversations between an old philosopher and his younger friend, and Nietzsche and his friend, are just listening. Now, my friend, the philosopher interrupted with a laugh. You are talking like someone who wants to jump into deep water without knowing how to swim, afraid not so much of drowning as of being laughed at for not drowning. But the last thing we should fear is being laughed at. There are so many truths to speak on this topic, so many frightening, embarrassing, unforgivable truths, that we will certainly not lack for enemies who sincerely hate us, and their rage alone will now and then produce an embarrassed laugh. Just think of the incalculable hordes of teachers who have cast their lot with the existing educational system, and who cheerfully, unreflectingly want to keep it. How do you think they will react when they hear about plans that exclude them, beneficio naturae, no less, or of demands that far exceed their middling abilities, or of hopes that find no echo in their hearts, or of struggles whose battle cry they cannot even begin to understand, and in which the only role they have to play is that of a dull, resistant, leaden mass. It is probably no exaggeration to say that the vast majority of teachers at institutions of higher education will find themselves in this position. Hardly a surprise to anyone who considers how these people came into existence, how they become teachers of higher learning. Institutions of higher education have proliferated everywhere in such numbers that more and more teachers are needed to teach them. More than any population, even the most extravagantly talented, could possibly produce by natural means. As a result, far too many people with no true calling end up as teachers. And then, due to their overwhelming numbers and the instinct of a simul gaudet, they come to define the spirit of those institutions. Only someone without the slightest understanding of pedagogy could believe that laws or policies might somehow transform our undeniably excessive quantity of gymnasiums and teachers into an excess of quality. And ubertas ingeni, without reducing their number. No, we must proclaim with one voice that people truly destined by nature for an educational path are infinitely few and far between, and that far fewer institutions of higher education than what we have today would be enough to let these rare people develop successfully. In today's educational institutions, intended for the masses, precisely the people for whom such institutions should exist are the ones who receive the least support. At the same time, it is true with respect to teachers. The best among them, the only ones worthy of honorable title, if judged by the higher standard, are probably the least well situated to educate the young people who have been thrown together in gymnasiums of today, not chosen for the path of education. In fact, such teachers must in a way keep hidden from their students the best they have to offer. Meanwhile, the overwhelming majority of teachers feels perfectly at home because their limited gifts correspond in a certain sense and harmonize with the low levels and inadequacy of their certain students. It is in this majority that resoundingly calls for establishing more and more gymnasiums and institutions of higher learning. Indeed, we live in an age when the incessant bewilderingly shifting call for education gives the impression that some tremendous culture and its need is desperately thirsting to be satisfied. But it is just here that one must know how to listen properly. Here, refusing to be led astray by the ringing sound of these educational slogans is where one must take a straight, hard look at those who talk so tirelessly about the cultural demands of the age. One will then feel a strange disappointment, my dear friend. We have felt it so often. These heralds proclaiming the needs of culture, seen from up close, appear suddenly transformed into eager, even fantastical enemies of true culture. One that holds firm to the aristocratic nature of the spirit. Their fundamental goal is the emancipation of the masses from the rule of the great individuals. What they are working towards is the overthrow of the most sacred order in the empire of the intellect. The servitude, submissive obedience, and instinctive loyalty of the masses to the scepter of genius. I have long since grown accustomed to looking hard at the eager advocates of so-called popular education, as it is commonly understood. Most of the time, what they consciously or unconsciously want is unfettered freedom for themselves in a universal saturnalia of barbarism. But the sacred natural order will never grant it to them. They are born to serve, to obey. Every time their creeping thoughts try to get anywhere on their wooden legs or broken wings, it only confirms the kind of clay from which nature has made them, the mark with which she has stamped upon them. Education for the masses cannot be our goal. Only the cultivation of the chosen individual, equipped to produce great and lasting works. We know full well, do we not, that a just posterity will judge the overall cultural condition of the people of today solely and entirely on the great basis of heroes of the age who stride in solitude. It will render its verdict based on how these heroes have been recognized, encouraged, and honored, or else pushed aside, mishandled, and destroyed. The people are given culture in only a crude and completely external way when that is the direct goal. For example, with mandatory universal primary education. The deep regions where the masses come into true contact with culture, where a people harbors its religious instincts, where it continues to create its mythical images, where it stays faithful to its customs, its laws, its native soil, are hardly ever reached along a direct path and always through destructive violence. Truly advancing the cause of popular education in these serious realms means defending against such destructive forces while preserving the benefit unconsciously. The healthy sleep of the people, without which counterweight and remedy no culture, with the all-consuming tension and excitement it produces, can endure. But I know what those who want to interrupt the benefit, health, and sleep of the people really want. They constantly cry to the people, "Wake up! Become conscious! Be smart!" And even as they pretend that the extraordinary increase of the number of the schools and the creation of the proud class of teachers in consequence satisfies a powerful need for education, I know their real goal. They're fighting, and not this is how they fight, against the natural hierarchy in the empire of the intellect. They seek to destroy the roots of the highest and noblest cultural powers that, bursting forth from the popular unconscious, have a maternal destiny to give birth to, raise, and nurture genius. Only with this metaphor of the mother can we grasp the importance of true popular education. His origin and its duty to the genius. The genius is not actually born of the culture or education. His origin is, as it were, metaphysical, his homeland metaphysical. But for him to appear, to emerge from a people, to reflect, as it were, in its full array of color, the whole image of a people and its strengths, to reveal this people's highest purpose in the symbolic essence of one individual and his enduring work, thereby linking his people to the external and liberating his people from the ever-changing sphere of the momentary. All of this the genius can do only if he has been ripened in the womb and nourished in the lap of his people's culture. Without this sheltering, incubating home, there is absolutely no way for the genius ever to unfold his wings and take eternal flight. Instead, he sadly, swiftly steals away like a stranger driven forth from an uninhabitable country into wintry desolation. Teacher, his companion said, you amaze me with this metaphysics of genius. And I have a dim sense of the truth in these metaphors. But I understand perfectly what you said before about the excessive number of gymnasiums and the resulting excess of teachers. My own experience convinces me that the overwhelming number of teachers who have basically nothing to do with education or culture for that matter, and have ended up on this path with these pretensions solely because of a demand for instructors must be what determines the orientation of the gymnasium today. Once someone has experienced the shining moment of insight that reveals how unique and unapproachable and remote Hellenic antiquity really is, and has fought a difficult inner battle to defend his belief, he knows full well that this insight will always remain inaccessible to the many. Inaccessible. Such a person will find it absurd, even undignified, to use the Greek for, let us say, professional reasons, to earn his bread shamelessly, prodding and poking around at this sanctuary with a workingman's hand and everyday tools. And yet, this crude and disrespectful sensibility is universal and precisely the group of people who make up the majority of gymnasium teachers, the philologists. So the fact that gymnasium's perspective is to preserve and propagate this attitude comes to no surprise. No surprise at all. Just look at the younger generation of philologists. How rarely among them do we see any sense of shame, any sense that we have no right to exist at all in the light of the world, like that of the Greeks. How cool, how brazen this young brood is, building its miserable nest in among the most magnificent temples. Smug and unashamed, they have been wandering around in that world's astounding ruins since their university years. To the vast majority of them, a mighty voice should bloom out from every corner. Away from here, you uninitiates, you will never be initiates. Oh no, fly without a word from this sanctuary, silent and ashamed. Alas, such a voice would sound in vain, for even to understand such a Greek style of curse and anathema, you need a little of the Greek within you. While these people are so barbaric that they simply set up shop amid the ruins as comfortably as you please, bringing along with their modern pursuits and conveniences and tucking them beside the columns and funerary monuments. Then there is great rejoicing when they find in these ancient surroundings what they themselves have smuggled in. I want to stop there for a second to say a little commentary. I've done most of this without commentary, but I want to just say that this is actually exactly what you find in the classical world today. You find the topic of the LGBT, the topic of feminism, the topic of racism. That's what the classical education is today, trying to take our modern propaganda and what Friedrich Nietzsche says here, smuggle it into the past. It never existed, okay? That never existed. I have a magazine that I got yesterday that was on the Roman Empire, and I don't know if I should say I was shocked or horrified or just rolled my eyes when one of the first things it said was that women in the Roman Empire were basically in a stage that was more progressive than most of the Western world today. And that just is plain wrong, okay? If we talk about progressive as in feminism and that type of thing, no, it wasn't. There was never a Roman emperor who was a female, unless we go into the Byzantine era and we include empresses. So that's just wrong. And then the idea about that their progressiveness included some type of progressive goal, progressive aspect of sexuality. No, it didn't. The punishment for adultery was death in the Roman Empire under the laws of under the laws of Caesar Augustus. Adultery was punished by death, and there was only two genders, male and female. I don't know how progressive that is, but yeah, that's exactly what they're doing today. Just like they did in the 1890s, 1870s, or whatever, is take modern propaganda. What do we want the people to believe? We want the people to believe that there's this LGBTQ, and so we're going to shove it into the Roman Empire and then pretend like it existed way back then. It's complete nonsense, but that's what they do. And if you're dumb enough to believe it, kudos to you. You could be the next dullard with a PhD and teach subsequent generations the next stupid thing that they want to teach in the disguise of classicism. Anyways, I want to jump back into this text, but just wanted to reread that phrase because I think it is actually quite provocative and quite telling that is the agenda that they have even today. Take the propaganda and what Friedrich Nietzsche says, smuggle it in. So let me just reread that. Then there is great rejoicing when they find in the ancient surroundings what they themselves have smuggled in. I'm going to go back to read that last little bit. Alas, such a voice would sound in vain, for even to understand such a Greek style of curse and anathema. You need a little Greek within you, while these people are so barbaric that they simply set up shop amid the ruins and comfortably as you please, they bring along all their modern pursuits and conveniences, tucking them beside the columns and funerary monuments. Then there is a great rejoicing when they themselves find these ancient surroundings and within what they themselves have already smuggled. And so, yeah, that is a good explanation of what they're doing. That they smuggle in propaganda, shove it in the antiquity, and then they say, look, kids, we found a gay person, we found the LGBTQ, we found racism, we found feminism. Let's write some essays and theses and all this. We found the propaganda that we shoved in and smuggled in, and I want you to find it just like we found what we ourselves have hidden. It's complete nonsense. Okay, this is not a classical education, but this is actually what's going on. So I digress. Let me keep going. Page 44, paragraph 2. One of them writes poetry and is clever enough to look up words in Ezekiel's dictionary. He is convinced at once that his calling is to modernize Aeschylus, and then he finds people gullible enough to believe that he himself and Aeschylus are congenial. He's a poetasting criminal. Poetasting criminal. Another with suspicious eye of a police inspector hunts down every contradiction, every hint of a contradiction that Homer is guilty of. He wastes his entire life shredding and sewing back together the Homeric rags that he himself first tore off the magnificent original garment. A third feels unsettled by antiquity's orgies and mysteries. He decides once and for all that only enlightened Apollo counts and sees in the Athenian nothing but a cheerful, common sense Apollonian, if somewhat immoral. What a sigh of relief he breathes when he has restored another dark corner of antiquity to his own level of enlightenment. When he discovers in old Pythagoras, for example, a sturdy fellow traveler in his enlightening politics. A fourth torments himself with the question of why Epidus was condemned by fate to such an abominable thing, having killed his father and married his mother. What was Epidus guilty of? Where is the poetic justice? Suddenly, he realizes the truth. Epidus was actually a creature of passion, lacking all Christian charity. And let me do a little side footnote, because this is actually one thing I've studied, and that is that what Friedrich Nietzsche is hinting at there is that actually the reason why Epidus killed his father and married his mother by this fate was that he was the first teacher to have some type of sexual misconduct with one of his students. And so this is talked about in other books. And if you understand that backstory, it makes sense that he did this horrific thing, having this relationship that was of a sexual nature with a student, and then the fates damned him to this horrific future of accidentally killing his biological father and accidentally having a sexual relationship with his biological mother. This is another reason why, if you actually know the classical world for what it was, there is no reason to believe that any type of a sexual relationship between students and teachers was ever a thing. There are people that have tried to claim that it was. Again, this is that they smuggle it into the past, reinterpret the past. The actual history is to say that the Athenians were all on the same page with saying that you do something that horrific to a student, the fates are going to be after you, make you, kill your father, marry your mother, get all messed up. That's what Friedrich Nietzsche is hinting at here, is that he says Epidus was actually a creature of passion. That's what he's saying. He had this sexual relationship with his student, lacking all Christian charity, again, describing the act. And that's the reason he killed his father, married his mother. Again, this is not the information in the play, but you do find it in Apollodorus. And there's a few other places that it mentions this. Apollodorus, for one, mentions specifically that was part of the backstory of Epidus. Okay, and I continue. He even flew into an unseemly rage once when Tyrrheus called him a monster and the curse of his country. Be meek and gentle. Maybe that was Sophocles' lesson. Otherwise, you will be doomed to marry your mother and kill your father as well. Still others spend their whole lives counting the lines and syllables of the Greek and Roman poets and delighting in the proportions of 7:13 and 14:26. Finally, someone announced that he had solved the Homeric question from the standpoint of prepositions and thinks that he can draw truth up out of the well with ana and kata. All of these people, whatever they are doing, are rooting and rummaging around in the Greek soil so restlessly, so clumsily, that any true friend of antiquity cannot help but be troubled. If it were up to me, I would take by the hand anyone who feels the slightest professional inclination toward the ancient world, talented or talentless, and declaim, quote, "Do you have any idea of the dangers that threaten you, young man, set forth on your journey with nothing more than a book, a little book of learning? Have you heard that, according to Aristotle, being crushed by a falling statue is not even a tragic death? Just the death is this that threatens you. Are you surprised? You should know that philologists have spent centuries trying to raise once more the statue of Greek antiquity, long since fallen and sunk deep into the earth. And they have never succeeded, for it is a colossus on which any individual can only clamber like a dwarf. Tremendous collective efforts, all the leverage of modern culture, have been brought to bear, and again, this statue, barely raised from the ground, has fallen back to crush those beneath it. And it is to be so. Every creature has to die of something. But who can ensure that the statue itself will not break? Philologists perish and are reduced to dust because of the Greeks. That is a loss that we can live with. But for antiquity itself to be shattered because of the philologists, consider this, reckless man, and withdraw, assuming you too are no iconoclast, end quote. The philosopher laughed. The truth is, many philologists nowadays have needed to follow your call, and they themselves too have retreated. This is very different from my experience as a young man. Today, whether consciously or unconsciously, philologists have largely come to the conclusion that any direct contact with classical antiquity on their part is pointless and hopeless. Even they consider such studies sterile, derivative, and obsolete. All the more happily then does this horde fall back on linguistics, an endless expanse of freshly cleared arable land, plowable land that is, where even the most limited minds can now find useful employment, where the very modesty of their ambition is considered a positive virtue. For a rank and file piece of work is exactly what is most desired, given the uncertainty of the new methods of the continuous risk of fantastical missteps. Here, no majestic voice resounds from the ruined world of antiquity to rebuff the newcomer. All who reproach are welcomed with open arms, even someone on whom Sophocles and Aristophanes have never made any particular impression. in whom these writers have never once produced a credible thought, even if he can be set down before an etymological spinning wheel or sent out to collect the detritus of far-flung dialects, and so his day passes, linking and separating, gathering and scattering, running about in the field, and consulting reference books in his study. But now this useful researcher is supposed to teach. This useful researcher is supposed to teach. He, of all people, because of the work he has done in linguistics, supposedly has something to offer gymnasium students about the very same thing ancient authors who have never made the least impression on him, much less brought him any insight. It's a quandary, all right. Antiquity has nothing to say to him, and as a result, he has nothing to say about antiquity. Suddenly, a light dawns, and he feels better. Is he not a scholar of languages? And did these authors not write in Greek and Latin? Now he can cheerfully launch into etymologies, starting with Homer and call in Lithuanian or Church Slavonic for help, and above all, holy Sanskritum. Sanskritum. As though Greek class were nothing but a pretext for a general introduction to linguistics, and as though Homer had just one flaw. Just one tiny flaw. Not having written in Proto-Indo-European. Anyone familiar with today's gymnasiums will acknowledge how far removed their teachers are from any classical inclinations. And how precisely because they are aware of this failure, the scholarly pursuit of comparative linguistics has gained such an upper hand. To me, the young man replied, it seems that the real problem is that the teacher of classical culture doesn't mix his Greeks and Romans with other barbaric people. For him, Greek and Latin can never be just one alongside others. Given his classicizing inclinations, it is completely irrelevant whether the languages are related, whether the skeleton of the language corresponds to the structure of that. Correspondence is not the point, insofar as he teaches culture and tries to model himself on the noble classical prototype. He cares about what is not in common, the non-barbaric qualities that sets the Greeks and Romans apart from all others. And I may be wrong, said the philosopher, but I suspect that mastery of language, the ability to express oneself comfortably in speech and in writing, is precisely what is being lost with how Latin and Greek are taught in gymnasiums today. I see Christian Stone saying, what the Sigma? Thank you, Christian, for watching. What the Sigma today is real. This is very relevant because of what Friedrich Nietzsche saw in 1872 has gone as far can be into what we see today. And that is why this text is so relevant. It is exactly what is happening to our educational system today. And it impacts me because I do teach Greek and Latin and Hebrew, teach classical languages, and I am about where Friedrich Nietzsche was when he wrote this. I'm 27 years old, and Friedrich Nietzsche was 27 when he wrote this. A lot in common. I mean, besides his theology, I'm the Orthodox Christian version of Friedrich Nietzsche. If Friedrich Nietzsche believed in God, I think we would see eye to eye on so many things. Here we go. And I may be wrong, said the philosopher, but I'm suspective that a mastery of language, the ability to express oneself comfortably in speech and in writing, is precisely what's being lost with how Latin and Greek are taught in the gymnasiums today. My own generation, admittedly old now and much reduced in number, excelled in this ability. Teachers today, it seems to me at least, produce with their students so textually and historically that at best they might turn out some more little Sanskritists or etymological Roman candles or wanton conjectural text instructors. But not a single student who can read his Plato or his Tacitus with pleasure, as we old men could. The gymnasiums may still be academic greenhouses, but not for a kind of scholarship that is the natural and unintentional offshoot, as it were, of an education with truly noble goals. They breed a scholarship comparable to the hypertrophied swell of an unhealthy body. Scholarly obesity is what the gymnasium nurseries of today produce, if indeed they have not degenerated into wrestling schools for the elegant barbarism that nowadays fancies contemporary German culture. But where, his companion replied, where should these countless poor teachers go? With no dowry of natural talent to bring to true culture, and offering their services as teachers only out of necessity, since they need to put food on the table, and since a surplus of schools requires a surplus of teachers. Where should they flee when antiquity imperiously rejects them? Must they not fall victim to the forces of the present age that day after day call out to them through the infatigable resounding organ of the press? We are culture. We are education. We are the pinnacle. We are the tip of the pyramid. We are the apex of the world history. They hear these seductive promises, but what they are told to embrace as the foundation of a totally new and superlatively advanced form of cultural context, in reality, of the most ignominious systems of anti-culture, the plebeian culture pages of magazines and newspapers, even if the barest suspicion survives in them that these promises are lies. Lies! Then where shall these poor creatures go? Where shall they go? Where else but to the stupidest, most pedantic, barren academic scholarship? If only so as not to hear any more of this heedless, unending, infatigable searching for culture, hounded this way, must they not finally stick their head in the sand like an ostrich? Is that not true happiness? Is it not true happiness for them to lead underground life of an ant, buried under dialects, etymologies, and conjectures, miles away from true culture, but at least with their ears sealed shut, deaf and immune to the siren along the elegant culture of today? You are right, my friend, the philosopher said. But where is it written in stone that there have to be so many schools and hence ever more growing teachers? Where is it written? After all, we are well aware that the demand for more schools comes from a sphere inimical to true education, and that as a result, it ends in nothing but anti-education. There is only one reason why we think of this demand as written in stone. The modern state is in the habit of making its views on these matters known and accompanying its educational demands with saber rattling. This phenomenon naturally makes as strong an impression on most people as the voice of eternal truth written in stone, the primal law of things. Incidentally, the state that makes these demands, the culture of the state, as they put it these days, is a recent development. A recent development. It's a recent development. It has become self-evident only in the last 50 years, a period when so many things have come to seem, to use the era's favorite word again, self-evident, without for all that being evident in the least. The most powerful of these modern states, Prussia, is so bold and aggressive and at the same time so heavy-handed in its centralized management of culture and schooling that the dubious principle it has seized upon has become generally dangerous and a particular threat to the true German spirit. Systematic efforts are instituted to make sure that the gymnasium keeps up with the times. As they say, measures to send as many students as possible to gymnasiums are encouraged. And in fact, the state here makes use of its most powerful inducement, the granting of privileges connected to military services, with such success that according to the independent testimony of official statisticians, the general overcrowding of Prussia and its gymnasiums and the urgent continual need to establish more of them can be traced back to this policy alone. How better to ensure an excess of educational institutions than by linking to the gymnasium ever higher and most of the lower positions in the civil service, admission to university, and the most influential military positions with all the perks. In a country, moreover, where the bureaucracy's unbounded political ambitions, I'm just curious if whoever's in the chat could tell me where they're from. Are you from Germany or are you from one of the European countries or America? That'd be an interesting. Say that in the chat. I'm curious to know. Americans' culture is based off of this education from Prussia, but I'd be interested in knowing USA. Okay, well, our system is basically derived from the Prussian government pre-Nazi Germany. That's where we got our schools from. So thank you very much. That's cool. Okay, here we go. In a country, moreover, where the bureaucracy's unbounded political ambitions and the widespread popular support for universal military service automatically pulls everyone with any talent towards these spheres, the gymnasium is seen as first, the foremost, a step on the ladder of honor, a track that everyone who feels driven toward the sphere of government must pursue. This is a new phenomenon, or at least a peculiar one. The state itself acting as a mystagogue of culture. It advances its own aims by forcing every one of its servants to show his face only with the torch of general state education in hand. And by that flickering light, he is meant to recognize the state as the highest goal in fact, the reward of all his educational pursuits. Now, this last point should really make these people stop and think. It should remind them, for instance, of a certain related tendency that only slowly came to be understood, a philosophy that at once was promoted for the state's sake and to advance the state's aim. The Hegelian philosophy. It would perhaps be no exaggeration to say that Prussia, by subordinating all educational aspirations to state pursuits, has succeeded to appropriating the one legacy of Hegelian philosophy that can be exploited in practice. It's apotheos of the state, which, it must be said, reaches its pinnacle precisely through the subordination of education. But what can the state want from such a strange practice? The philosopher's companion asked. It must have some purpose, as we can see merely from how other states marvel at Prussian schools. Study them carefully and sometimes try to copy them. Clearly, other states see these schools as useful for a state's longevity and power, much like the famous universal military service that now so widely is adopted. In Prussia, where everyone wears the soldier's uniform with pride for a time, and practically everyone has acquired the state's cultural uniform, as it were, through the gymnasium, an enthusiastic person might almost be moved to speak of educational classical conditions, a state omnipotence only ever achieved in antiquity, that almost every young man is driven by instinct and training to feel as the flower the highest purpose of human existence. Such a comparison, the philosopher said, would indeed be an enthusiast's hyperbole, limping along on one more lame leg. I'm just curious, too, now that I got 5 listeners, if you could comment in the chat what age you are and what your grade level is. I'm curious how many college students and how many high schoolers I have, or if you are all, I don't know. If you can, post your education. I think that'd be interesting. Do you have a PhD and you're listening to this because you agree, master's degree? Are you in high school, middle school? That'd be cool. If you can, that'd be cool. I got 5 listeners, so thank you. Such a comparison, said the philosopher, would indeed be an enthusiast's hyperbole, limping along on more than one lame leg. For this utilitarian perspective, in which culture deserves respect, only insofar as it can certainly serves the state, and in which any impulses that cannot immediately be adopted to the state's own ends should be stamped out. I'm just curious. I have a W in education. What does that mean, a W? Does this mean withdrawn? Does this mean you wish not to say? I'm just curious. For me, I was homeschooled, but then I did get a bachelor's degree in classics after dropping out of college twice. I went back 3rd time and got my degree. What does a W mean? That's interesting. I've never heard of a W education before. That's interesting, to say the least. Okay. Where was I? That is precisely why the profound Greek felt an admiration for and gratitude to the state that would seem almost shockingly strong to modern people. He recognized that not a single seed of culture could grow and develop without the state's necessary protection. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second. It means I have school, but also watch Skibbity Toilet, which is great education. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I've heard a little bit about it. I had a great lecture in one of my Latin classes where I taught the Greek word skipti. Skipti means a dugout latrine. And I had all of my students make skipti toilets. You got to see this. So I don't know if you can see this or not on the camera. Okay, it's way too bright. These are my students' Roman skibbity toilets. Roman skibbity toilets. I had them cut out skibbity Roman statues and put them on the Roman toilets in Ephesus. Hold on, now I'm going the wrong way. Roman toilets, Roman heads on Roman toilets in Ephesus. It was a very humorous project. It was. So yeah, Roman heads on Roman toilets. Some kids did better than others. Roman heads on Roman toilets. That's what I think of a classical skibbity toilet, if you ever asked me. But I digress. I was reading Friedrich Nietzsche, so let me continue. I'm almost done. I got 2 more pages, and then I'll be finished. I like skibbity toilets, by the way. That's a really cool thing you brought up. Roman skibbity toilets, that is. He recognized that not a single seed of culture could grow and develop without the state's necessary protection. And his whole inimitable culture, unique in all history, could flourish as luxuriously as it did only under the wise and careful aegis of these protective institutions. The state was not the culture's border patrol and regulator, its watchman and warden, but the culture's steady, muscular, battle-ready comrade and companion, escorting his admiration, nobler and, so to speak, transcendent as a friend through harsh reality and earning that friend's gratitude in return. When the state lays claim to our enthusiastic gratitude nowadays, in contrast, it is surely not due to any chivalrous regard for German higher culture and art. In this regard, Germany's past is no less disgraceful than its present. As the slightest glance at how our great poets and artists are celebrated in German cities and how these masters' artistic projects are supported by the state will show. There must be some explanation then, both for the state's tendency to promote everything here called culture and for the pseudo-culture that actually promotes one which bows to the authority of the state. This tendency finds itself at war, open or concealed, with both the genuine German spirit and any culture of education that it can derive from it. As I have sketched out with hesitation, strokes for you here, my friend, the idea of education promoted and encouraged with such intense interest by the state, and due to which its schools are so admired abroad, must therefore be rooted into a sphere that never touches the genuine German spirit. The spirit that speaks to us so wonderfully from the innermost core of the German Reformation, German music, and German philosophy. Like a prince in exile, this spirit is viewed with indifference and scorn by an education system wallowing in state sponsorship. The spirit is a stranger wandering past in solitary grief, while pseudo-culture, swinging its censer back and forth, have arrogated to itself its name and its worth, playing a humiliating game with the word German to the cheers of cultured school teachers and journalistic scribblers. Why does the state need such a surplus of educational institutions and teachers? Why promote educational, national, and popular enlightenment on such scale? Because the genuine German spirit is so hated. Because they fear the aristocratic nature of true education and culture. Because they are determined to drive the few that are great into self-imposed exile. So that a pretension to culture can be implanted and cultivated in the many, because they want to avoid the hard and rigorous discipline of a great leader and convince the masses that they can find the path themselves. under the guiding star of the state. Now that is something new, the state as a guiding star of culture. Meanwhile, one thing consoles me: the German spirit, embattled as it is, and for which they have substituted such a gaudy stand-in. This spirit is brave. It will fight its way into a pure age and save itself. Noble as it is and victorious as it will be, it will maintain a certain sympathetic attitude toward the state, even if the state, belingered and hurried, allies itself with pseudoculture. After that, what do we know of how difficult it is to rule over men, to preserve law, order, peace, and prosperity among millions and millions of people who, to judge by the great majority, are boundlessly selfish, unjust, unreasonable, dishonest, envious, malicious, mean-spirited, and at the same time, thoroughly narrow-minded and perverse, while constantly struggling to protect what little the state has acquired for itself from covetous neighbors and treacherous thieves. Under such pressures, a state naturally turns to any ally it can, and when one of these allies goes so far as to offer its services with pompous phrases, when it describes the state in Hegel's words as an absolutely perfect ethical organism, and holds up the task of education, the job of discovering where and how a person can best serve state interests, how surprising is it that the state then falls into the arms of such an ally, crying out with full conviction in its deep barbaric voice, "Yes, you are education. You are culture." And there is the end of lecture 3. I would be interested if you could post in the comment section what draws you to this channel. And I have enjoyed having quite a few people watching me live. Thank you, Christian, for watching me. And thank you to everyone who's posted in the chat. I have not done too many streams for a while that have at least gotten attention. One of the main reasons for this has been that I'm doing a lot of streaming in ancient Greek, and very few people are able to audibly listen to ancient Greek and comprehend it. And so this is something where I know that nobody else is doing what I'm doing on YouTube, reading Greek aloud. That's very rare. Beside in a church setting, nobody does just read books in Greek or Latin. I also am reading The Hobbit in Latin on my channel. Nobody really does that. Okay, so I would be interested to just know what brings you to the channel, and also if and when I read lecture 4, if you would be interested in tuning in, I think that would be great. I will give you a second to write in the chat if you want to. As my ending, I'm going to just open up to Friedrich Nietzsche's original German. I'm going to read a little bit of that. Notice that my German skills are not going to be nearly so good as my English, and so my apologies. But I just want to give you some idea of what this sounded like in German. So I'll just let me just read the last paragraph that I just did. So if you want to school, if you want to read or do something in the chat, I'll still give you a few seconds. Here is my German. Ein neues Phänomen der Stadt als Leitern der Bildung. Inzwischen tröstet mich an. Dieser deutsche Geist, den man so bekauft, die man einem buntbehägsten Wecker substituieren hat, Dieser Geist ist tapfer, er wird sich kämpfen in eine reinere Periode hindurchretten. Er wird sich selbst edel, wie er ist, und siegreich, wie er sein wird, eine gewisse mitleidige Empfindung gegen das Staatswesen bewahren, wenn die in seiner Not und auf das Äußerste bedrängt. Eine solche Pseudokultur als Genossen erfasst. Denn was weiß man schließlich von der Schwierigkeit der Aufgabe, Menschen zu regieren, das heißt, unter vielen Millionen eines der großen Mehrzahl nach grenzenlos egoistischen, ungerechten, unbilligen, unredlichen, neidlichen Botschaften und dabei sehr beschränkten und querköpfigen Geschlechten gesetzt, ohne Ruhe und Frieden aufrecht zu erhalten. Und dabei das wenige, was der Staat selbst als Besitz erworben, fortwährend gegen begehrliche Nachbarn und türkische Räbersten zu stößen. Ein so bedrängter Staat greift nach einem Bundegossen und wenn ein Schlosser gar in pompösen Wendungen sich selber anbieten, wenn er ihn, den Staat, etwa wie die Hegel getan hat, als absolut vollendeten entischen Organismus bezeichnet und als Aufgabe der Bildung für jeden hinstellt, den Ort und die Lage ausfindig zu machen, wo er dem Staat am nützlichen diene, wenn wir es Wunder nehmen, wenn der Staat einem solchen sich anbietenden Bundesgenossen ohne weiteres um den Hals fällt und nun auch mit seiner tiefen barbarischen Stimme und in voller Übersetzung ihm zuruft: Ja, du bist Bildung, du bist die Kultur. All right, thank you. Back just adding my screen recording and taking the brain rot exam. Editing my screen recording and taking the brain rot exam. Oh, okay. I don't exactly know what that means, but thank you everyone for listening. Even wenn ich ein bisschen in Deutsch gestellt hat, even though I said some stuff in German. I know ich can nicht sehr gut Deutsch lesen. I don't read German that well, least of all to meistens Altdeutsch, okay? I don't read Old Deutsch that well, but I try, okay? Ich versuche und wenn ich versuchen kann, ich werde zu meistens ein bisschen versuchen. To meistens, okay? At least try to say a little bit in German when I can. I'd love to do a recording the whole thing, but I think I botched it up too well. I mean, too much. So thank you. Es freut mich, dass alles hier gehört hat. Danke sehr, dass Sie alles mich die Zeit gegeben hat und dass Sie können mich, was ist Führer? Führer. Nein, ich meinte, dass Sie haben mir ein bisschen Zeit gegeben. Und du hast gegeben Zeit, okay? You've given me time. Danke sehr. Thank you so much. Und es freut mich. Es freut mich is like, it pleases me. I'm happy to know. Es freut mich, dass sie alles hier gehören hat und dass ich habe 4 Personen hier, die mich jetzt hören. Es freut mich, okay? Es freut mich sehr. Danke sehr und cheers. Thank you. Auf Wiedersehen. I'll be back to stream the next one at another time. Maybe in a few days or maybe tomorrow. Depends on how much time I have. I will be back for lecture 4. Did you say donkey? Nein, ich kenne Deutsch nicht die beste in der ganzen Welt sprechen, aber ich verstehe Deutsch sehr gut. Und auf Deutsch, donkey is not really a word. I think they have something equivalent to the word ass. What is the German word for donkey? Give me 1 second. German word for donkey. I mean, yeah, Esel. Esel. So, yeah. Do you mean you're non-Riz? I am Skibbity Ohio Riz, just to let you know. I am a Hoosier of all Hoosiers. I grew up in the state of Indiana, and before Election Day, I got my Ohio residence. And so, yes, I voted for Trump in a swing state, and that is my Skibbity Ohio Riz, if that means anything to you. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys back in another stream. Until then, Skibbity Ohio Riz, that's what I got, and I'll see you guys later. Till then, bye for now.